If you want to see the fate of democracies, look out the windows.
Robert Edward House is introduced in New Vegas. He is described as an entrepreneur, a technical genius, and a business magnate. He was modeled after the business tycoon Howard Hughes, known as the wealthiest self-made person of his time, who lived in penthouses of hotels in various cities such as Las Vegas and became reclusive and enigmatic in his later years. Robert House was the founder of Rubco Industries, responsible for the Pip-Boy, the Protectrons, and a unified operating system that is run on most terminals. Due to the success of these projects, he was a billionaire by the time he was 30. Mr. House also understood the nature of governments, politics, and war. He was born during the Cold War, lived through the resource wars, had connections to the military, and predicted the events of nuclear war. He used his money and his technical knowledge to set up a defensive laser system in his Las Vegas hotel to shoot down any nuclear weapons that might have come through, as well as transmitting disarm codes to warheads in transit. He was successful in doing so, nullifying most of the atomic bombs in the atmosphere and protecting Las Vegas from the destruction of the Great War. Mr. House then united the tribal clans around the area and rebuilt the Las Vegas Strip into New Vegas, a tourist attraction filled with casinos, resorts, lights, and entertainment. Perhaps the only one of its kind in the New World. New Vegas attracted many customers, earning riches through his tourism ventures. He was able to defend his property from raiders and other troublemakers through his personal army of Securitrons, which are resistant to shrapnel and small arms fire. His goal was to use the capital he earned through his business ventures to rebuild the production capabilities of humanity. He claimed that he could reignite the technological development sectors within 20 years, which means he'll expand agriculture communities, create industries using steam or nuclear power, and bring the atomic age back to the wasteland within 2 decades. These goals are achievable for Mr. House, considering his past career successes, his technical knowledge, and the capital he earns through New Vegas. He may be the only person alive who is capable of doing so. The plot of New Vegas was based on the challenges Mr. House faced when the NCR and the Legion conspired to annex his estates. While factions such as the NCR and the Legion resembles functional societies, Mr. House rejected them as regurgitations of the past. He predicts that both factions will inevitably collapse into themselves because they repeat the same political and economic mistakes of history. Mr. House thought that the NCR carries over the same pre-war flaws of democracy and held no respect for its corrupt bureaucracy. He also thought that the Legion held no long-term prospects and that it could not survive without Caesar's brutality. Once Caesar was out of the picture, either through natural causes or through his many enemies, the Legion would be doomed to fall within a year, consuming on itself through constant internal infighting. Mr. House tells the player that he is not interested in abusing others or issuing laws that dictates what people can or can't do in their private time. He resembles a man who is principled, rational, and honest. He describes the relationship with the player as well as the tribal clans as one based on contracts and employment, rather than violence or legislation. He rejects authoritative governments and the democracies that enables them, which he blames for the Great War, and prefers the freedom to direct his own economic resources and capital investments himself, which is what the NCR and the Legion threaten to take away from him. If Mr. House had the economic freedom to rebuild industries, it would allow other factions, such as the followers of the Apocalypse, to benefit from a more productive and resource-rich economic world. A world where people didn't have to rely on scavenging to get by, but where items were produced and manufactured on a mass scale. This would allow people who are dependent on scavenging new opportunities, as well as reducing the incentive for bandits to raid others. This reality is not something the NCR or the Legion are interested in achieving, as they don't have the technological or economic means to do so, and prefer to fall forcefully take other people's property for their own ends. If the player helps Mr. House achieve independence, Mr. House will punish people who had previously aligned themselves to his enemies, including the Legion and the expansive NCR. He physically removes one of his neighboring factions, the Kings, if they aligned themselves with the NCR in your playthrough. He also imposes heavy taxes on the citizens of Prim if they conspire to help the NCR annex his estates. No other abuses from him are recorded in the game, which means Mr. House is probably true to his word. Mr. House is the preferred faction I align with in my playthroughs, as he represents liberty, progress, competence, and a bright future for humanity, while the other factions do not. While the independent ending of Vegas also brings freedom and liberty to New Vegas, Mr. House is the only person who has the intelligence, the economic means, the determination, and a longevity that can provide the wasteland the long-term solutions that it desperately needs, which is something the Curia, the NCR, and the Legion could never achieve.